Like I said, you couldn't come back.
Emmerich, do we have video rolling? Yes. Excellent. Are we up to speed? Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Smpte New England Rite of Spring. Every year for I don't know how many years. I myself did not go to NAB this year. I went for about 35 years in a row, and every year I would say, what in the world could they possibly come up with now? And every year, somehow they managed to do it. So I'm impressed. And if any of you were involved in producing any of that equipment, my hat's off to you. First of all, I want to thank Wgbh, who invited us down here when our previous venue became unavailable. And they've done just an amazing job. We've got their studio cameras recording this. I can't, Emmerich Feldmar, how about a hand for Emmerich Feldmar? Director of Engineering here. Thank you. Can't thank you enough. So fortunately, for that reason, we're not out in the street. So I want to introduce our distinguished panelists tonight, all of whom wore out their shoe leather this year at the show. And if any of you have tried to see the 1,800 or so exhibitors at the show, you know that you better have good feet. So on my left is John Rule of Rule Boston Camera, a longtime participant, and Stacy Decker, the Chief Technical Officer of Wgbh. And then from Emerson College, we have Tim MacArthur, Tim, and Jerry Field from American Public Television, their Vice President of Technology, and finally, Bob Lamb. And Bob's been with us for years and years, and Bob has been with Smpte for years and years and has been our webmaster for many years, and he's formerly with Broadcast Picks, currently with Belmont Media. So that's our lineup, and I'd like to introduce our interlocutor for tonight, the very distinguished Phil Ozek, who is a past chair and one of my mentors when I joined over 30 years ago. And Phil is an old hand at eliciting responses from these gentlemen. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil with a big thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you, Phil.
I don't know if I can be classified as a mentor to you, Marty, because you're older than me. So let's get that out of the way, right? But anyway, yeah, what a venue we have here, huh? First time at GBH for NAB wrap-up here. This is wonderful, and as Emmerich would say, thanks to viewers like you, we're here tonight. So this is a nice big turnout, and I'm glad to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience here. So here we go again, another NAB wrap-up, and truth be told, I haven't been to an NAB in many years. And I always attack this from the position of, I wasn't there, I'm going to extract from these people who were there, except for Bob, what they saw, and this is the first time Bob hasn't been able to get to NAB. So I say that in jest, but I know Bob will have a good perspective for us as well.
I can always argue.
Yeah, so, but what I like to do is try to extract from these folks who were there the questions that I would have if I was there. And which is getting harder to do, I think. As I looked through lists of companies that attended NAB this year, I didn't recognize probably more than half of the companies that were listed, and trying to understand who are these companies, what do they do, what do they offer. I mean, it's really been a sea change over the past few years of what NAB has kind of turned into. So with all that said, what I'd like to do is begin with kind of the formula that we've established in the past is, what was the theme this year? Is there something that stood out from the panelists that attended that they can share with us and expand upon that? So let's start with you, John, since you're right here gawking up at me.
talking.
Tell
You
me,
are handsome, so you know.
Well, that was the other thing I wanted to say. You know, we've got these big studio cameras here, and I've been accused of having a face for radio. So you know, I don't think the good cameras are a good idea. But anyway, what's that?
They're good cameras.
They're good cameras. So anyway, don't put it on YouTube. So John, tell us what you thought was this year's NAB theme.
There was a few of them. I mean, I think the most obvious one was probably 8K. You know, I usually do South Lower Hall first, and you walk in and there's Black Magic, and for me, they're sort of always the harbinger of where the industry is going. Love them or hate them, and this year there was just a ton of 8K switchers and routers and all kinds of stuff. You know, and they made it seem like 8K is here and ready to go today, so there was that, and AI was another trend. You know, AI everywhere, whether it needed to be or not. But I think, and Stacy and I were talking about this earlier, just this underlying sense of what is NAB as a show? Is it a show that, does it represent our industry anymore? Is there too much competition from other shows? Is the audience becoming dispersed in some way? You know, because there's a lot of people who aren't at the show anymore.
The traditional people that used to attend, right? You know, primarily broadcast engineers and their kind of technical support staff.
Well, no, I'm thinking more of manufacturers too.
Okay.
You know, I mean, what was it, like 5 years, 6 years ago when Apple decided to leave, and they felt that they didn't want to be beholden to the NAB schedule to release new products. They wanted to be able to release it on their own timetable. And so now Red is not there anymore.
When did Red back out?
Like 2 years
was it
ago,
2 years
I think.
ago? Okay.
They did have a suite, actually, but
Yeah,
it
did they?
was way hidden away in
Yeah.
Central Hall.
But it's very different.
Yeah, very
you know.
different.
Well, like Able Cine as well,
Yeah.
always had a big booth, and they had a suite off the floor as well. And you know, there's 2 Cine Gear shows now. There's IBC. There's just a lot of other shows, and NAB no longer is the show where the big announcements are held. And in fact, before this show, the products that I'm most interested in, which would be the cinematography type products, all of those were pre-announced, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks before NAB. So it's just the dynamic of the show is changing a lot for me anyway.
Yeah, so Stacy, from your perspective, and Stacy, this is your first time on our panel, I believe,
First
right?
time on the panel. I've been
So-
going to the NAB and for us, the technical conference that happens beforehand for public media.
Yeah.
But I've been doing it for about 21 years, so.
So from your perspective, and the groups that, you know, the stakeholders that you represent, what did you think the theme was? Was it ATS 3.0?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of in your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, so for us, being a broadcaster, I mean, every year has a different theme because we might be looking for something different, right? So it's not necessarily as widespread. We're kind of purposely going after the things that we are interested in. So this year, obviously, 3.0 was definitely something I think that we all paid attention to. I think it'd be interesting to have a bigger conversation about that with the folks in the room, because I do think that 3.0 has the potential for changing what we are and what we do and how we do it extensively. So there's probably another discussion associated with that. John mentioned, and I'm a big proponent of NAB. It's the one that I go to every year. I do actually go to the CES every couple of years, and I go to IBC every couple of years. Not every year, but every couple of years. But I see the value also in those conferences. You know, to keep an eye on what the consumer side is doing kind of helps us prepare for what we need to change in our industry as well, and how we need to change. So definitely 3.0. I think artificial intelligence and obviously cloud. I mean, the reason you're seeing the amount of new new technology companies show up like they are, I think, is because they're able to be so responsive and build so quickly because cloud technology is so, is so familiar to everyone. And I'm happy to say that we've ventured into that environment ourselves here at GBH, and I think it's paying dividends. My staff is doing different things because they're comfortable in the cloud, and that's something that's very important.
Yeah, I think we did last year, at the conclusion of last year's meeting, we used, we said that cloud was perhaps the biggest thing that was happening in NAB at the time, and something that we were certainly going to be talking about. Tim, from your perspective, education, what did you see that, or what themes did you see that you share with the crowd?
So, yeah, I wear many hats at Emerson, and, I look at things on the digital cinema side, so I follow in line with what John does, but then, we're supporting 3 television studios. So, I'm trying to look at all the different perspectives, and one of the things that stood out was 8K. There were 4 manufacturers that had 8K camera chains on the floor, and that was not something I was expecting. And then you add on the giant push from Blackmagic there with, their switcher and router and HyperDeck. There is AI everywhere, and I think it raises the point of because there are so many people that can easily spin up their software as a service they want to provide. It's why we don't recognize who these companies are, echoing what you were all saying. The other thing that was interesting is that it felt a lot smaller this year. Some of the booths were shrunk down, it felt like. Thursday is usually my favorite day because it's the day I can talk to people the most because the crowds are so much smaller. But even Wednesday this year was a lot slower. So it's definitely a change.
So does anyone know what the attendance was this year?
It was lower. It was down by about maybe 3 or 4%, I think.
Wow.
It seemed like more.
It felt way more. Yeah.
So it was under
It was
100,000,
below
or?
100,000 this year, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, well.
I mean, 91's still nothing to
It's a
sneeze
big-
at, but
yeah.
but
But what's
compared to where it's
CES?
been, yeah.
Yeah.
I think CES is close to 200 or 250 at this point. It's a lot.
Yeah,
It's almost double.
Yeah, it's big.
Well, that's
Holy
because of
cow.
the adult section.
No, that's actually not the same time anymore, I don't think.
Anything else, Tim, from your perspective that jumped out to you as a theme of the show? Or AI, 8K.
Yeah, AI, 8K were the things that really jumped out. The other thing that I found interesting too is, on the production side of things, I saw a lot more people pushing 12G versus IP, which I thought was interesting because previous years everything was IP, and it was very prevalent still this year, but I saw more talk of 12G as a standard.
As an emergent transport standard, yeah. Very good. Jerry, what do you got for us?
A little bit of a different perspective, I think, because my company is a content syndicator and distributor. So I'm out there looking at the areas that affect me, and one of them is really clearly the sort of a breaking down of some of the silos between OTT and broadcast. There's a lot of development going on, and I think some companies that are actually positioning themselves now as saying, that those separate areas don't exist anymore. It's all part of the same thing. And maybe I was looking for those people because I think that may be the case.
Yeah.
But I was feeling that. As Stacy mentioned too, I was also there for the PBS TechCon beforehand, and two themes that came out of that. One of them is that you may be aware, people may be aware that the public media distribution system is changing from satellite to terrestrial, and the SIX project, as we call it, has been rolling out over the last couple of years, and there was a lot of focus on that. That's really changing a lot of workflow for all of the stations as well, and it really changes things for us as a distributor quite a bit because we're talking about having our content in a library that people can pull from rather than having fixed to satellite feeds. So it's a really major change that way. The other part of that is that, I think people know is that there's been a bit of an issue for public television and public media with the skinny bundle products that have been out there too. There's virtually little or no public television presence in those products, and it had to do largely with rights that were available for doing live linear streaming. And there's been a major effort run by PBS or led by PBS at this point for negotiating with the providers to be able to bring public television content in there. And the TechCon had a fairly strong focus on that. We've done a lot of work over the last year or so to get virtually all of our rights now extended to include the live linear streaming rights, and that's a whole different thing. But it goes back to my other point about some of the silos breaking down a bit, where things that help us in a lot of ways is that a lot of services are being commoditized and more affordable. I'm doing things now that I couldn't afford to do 4 or 5 years ago.
So such as? So name an example.
Our entire supply chain right now is moved from tape to file, and did it in a very short period of time a couple of years ago. And we have a cloud library that we have where all the incoming, the submitted programs are coming to us, and then we're working from that. It's really changing all of our workflows as well.
You know, we've talked about this before, the transformation of the broadcast plant from one of a broadcast engineering design to an IT design.
Yeah.
So where are we on the spectrum of that? Are we more in the IT camp at this point? Are we kind of halfway there? And how much more do we have to go?
I'd go back to what my point that I was saying before about the silos going down. I think they're really going down. They're all becoming one of a different thing at this point. I mean, you know, I think that there still is a focus on broadcast in terms of quality and delivery of service, but there is also the advantages of there with IT. Where in my work day right now, I don't make any distinction between those two anymore. It's all pretty much the same thing. And I think on the show, I was feeling that a fair amount as well.
Yeah, interesting. Mr. Lamb, you know, as I stated, you were unable to attend, but I'm sure you have a good perspective as to some of the things that were displayed out there. And Bob and I were speaking before the event tonight about how a lot of the products now are just so inexpensive. You know, software-based, right? We've gone from a hardware-based situation to a software-based, and maybe you can leverage that, Bob, though.
Prices have come down. The real reason is that I'm working at a public access station, and there frankly was nothing at NAB we were thinking of buying. The closest to a big iron item that would be at NAB was a playback system. And starting 2 years ago, the 3 big vendors that serve public access, which is Telview, Tightrope, and Castus, weren't exhibiting at NAB, or at least they didn't have booths. One of those people had a suite in the hotel next door, and I went there. And the thing that I noticed is that it was filled with people who had bought systems and just wanted, you know, tutorials on how to use them and stuff like that. And it was good for morale, but it wasn't good for sales. So if I look at the kind of products at the access station that we're buying now, for example, we bought some inexpensive switching software that we put into the local schools. We never dealt with the people in person. We downloaded a free copy. We evaluated it, and when we were happy with it, we paid the money to get rid of the watermark. We started doing a news show. You would think that we'd be buying stuff for that. We have 5 very nice camcorders that people can use. And when we showed them to our volunteer news gathering people, they looked kind of askance at it, like it's heavy, it's got a lot of knobs, this kind of stuff, it's complicated. Isn't there something that we can use like with our phone? And they're shooting the news with the phone, and the things that the people are liking are things that you don't really see at NAB, which is these little gimbal mounts and other things that are enormously convenient. So we have really moved in user attitudes that they want small, light, YouTube-y type stuff. And frankly, the stuff they're making is quite good. So, yeah, I didn't go.
Yeah, I mean, it's astounding when I think back to when I first got into the business and how interested I was in taking an ENG camera with a huge lens and putting it on my shoulder and, you know, being weighed down by the inglorious standard definition at the time. And now you can do it on your iPhone, and that's what people prefer. That's kind of bizarre, but it's a sign of the times, I guess. So with all this said, with the themes that we're hearing, so is 8K, we talked about 8K in the past. I mean, is it necessary? I guess is the basic question. And why is it being embraced? Do we see an 8K future from a practical standpoint? Go ahead.
I mean, I think one of the things that you're looking at it for is remote sports and trying to find ways to do it cheaper, right? So you park 1 or 2 8K cameras at a stadium, and you punch in, you still get a UHD signal out of that one camera.
Yeah.
And so you get multiple looks. So, I mean, I think that's one of the big pieces.
Yeah.
I think but is it practical to build trucks that are all 8K? Is it, you're going to build this studio 8K? Probably not. I don't really see it there.
Actually, a really good demonstration of that I saw was in Panasonic's Whisper Suite, where they had an 8K camera, as Tim described, shooting a basketball game with 4 different cut-ins. But the thing that was interesting was that AI was controlling what each of the cutouts was doing. So they had trained it so that if there were 4 people around the basket, it would be in somewhat tight, but as soon as a 5th person came in to help, it would zoom out a little bit. And the moves that the AI was doing looked smooth, human-like. It was really kind of impressive to see.
Yeah, I mean, for us as a broadcaster, as a content maker, 8K is a good archive format because who knows what the future will bring, right? So I think we're going to want to acquire content in any form as high as we possibly can. That's generally the case. And then we'll deal with it in the future. At least you've got that opportunity. But definitely not for broadcast right now. That's not something that's even in my plan. Even if we're talking about 3.0, I don't think we're thinking that 3.0 is the opportunity to increase the level of quality of content, to be quite honest. I think the B2B stuff that's talked about with 3.0 is probably way more important for broadcasters than higher quality content with regard to video and audio, in my opinion.
I mean, I know there's 4K streaming now, but I haven't heard of anyone that's commercialized 8K streaming. Is that in our future?
No, though Sharp was showing it. That was the thing that surprised me. Though. Sharp had 2 8K cameras, was doing 8K streaming, 8K 5G transmission.
They were showing off.
Yeah, they were showing up, and I was like, I don't know if I've ever seen Sharp at NAB actually, and they had a huge booth this year, and everything 8K, and I was stunned.
Follow the patents.
Right.
So what's the bit rate on that if they're streaming 8K?
They were claiming 150 megabits per second.
Wow. Which seems a lot now, but in a short time it will,
Who knows?
it won't seem that much, right? Interesting. 8K in the cloud, was anyone talking about 8K in the cloud? I mean, that's probably a stretch at this point, I would
It's
imagine.
all about the pipes to get it there, right?
Right.
It's more so about that than that is the cloud can hold whatever you want. It just costs.
Yeah.
So that's not really, I mean, that's so scalable and the work that Amazon and Google have done. I don't see the value in building your own cloud anymore. It's kind of ridiculous. We depend on Amazon greatly. We've got a service that we provide here at GBH to other public media stations that is built in the cloud. You look at Netflix in itself, Netflix is all built on Amazon. They don't have any infrastructure, and they're a multi-billion-dollar company. So I think anybody who thinks they're going to get into the cloud business is, kind of lost that.
Well, and
missed that
one
market.
of the things I read today was that, one of the, I think it was TV Technology, one of their hits was AWS Media Connect.
Yeah.
So
They're coming, by the way.
What's that?
It's funny, AWS is coming for us, as
Yeah.
far as broadcasters are concerned, content creators. I mean, they've kind of been the sleeping giant, acquiring things, building things, and I hear it all the time. Matter of fact, I'm going to be in Seattle in a couple weeks to talk with them about, some of the things that we're doing here. They're very interested in broadcasting.
So is Amazon more of a cloud technology company now than an e-commerce company? I mean, it's...
I think cloud is actually sponsoring e-commerce right now. They're losing money on e-commerce from what I understand and making absolutely tons of money on the cloud.
Wow. That's just mind-boggling. Did you have a question, Marty? Okay. By the way, Marty, do we have a microphone for audience questions or? Just this one right here? Okay. Yeah, so,
Here, take mine.
anyway, I'm gonna go into the audience here because it looks like we have a question right now, so let's engage the audience here.
Thanks, Phil. I'm just curious, I haven't heard anything from anyone regarding HDR, and was wondering, how does HDR affect all of you, whether it's GBH rule or at Emerson or what you're doing? I'm not going to talk to Bob. So that's
They turned you off.
somebody turned me off.
I mean, I think there was less emphasis on HDR this year than in the last couple of years. But, and there was a lot of discussion actually about that. And I think people feel that there's not enough monitoring solutions or affordable monitoring solutions, and that's kind of holding that back a little bit. But I think that may be changing. Sony has a new lower priced HDR mastering monitor. But it is somewhat of a given right now. I mean, in my world anyway, where everybody's shooting with HDR in mind, because the consumer sets are out there anyway.
I agree. I mean, it's the direction we're going, but I don't know that anybody's gone there fully yet, but definitely for special projects.
And I think the reality is too is we're talking about 8K, but I don't think 8K there's the value to the consumer, but the HDR is really where you're seeing the difference. And 100%. So every camera or any top-end camera is going to have the HDR logo with it, and it is becoming a given.
I'll tell a really quick story. A company to be unnamed, their CTO told me that they presented to the Big Five, NBC, CBS, Fox, and ABC, years ago when there was a transition from SD to HD, and they were ready to write the check, right? When they saw the difference between the two, or even analog and digital, they were ready to write the check. They saw HDR versus HD, and they went, "Man, I'm not writing a check for that." So they just don't see the bang for the buck, I think, in the version, in the previous step up from content creation.
Yeah, so we have a couple other questions here. You still have
My
your?
question is still in the same vein. It's, as a consumer, when I'm watching well-produced content with the HDR done appropriately, it seems like my viewing experience is quite good. I've got a high-end Samsung TV at home, Apple TVs, nice pipe. And it looks really, really good. And I can't imagine how much 8K would have any impact on that. I'd rather have the gamut and HDR than 8K, given the cost.
There's been a number of demonstrations that show that to anybody standing even 30 feet away from a monitor, they can clearly see the difference between a regular, HD signal and an HDR one. But if you do the same comparison with a 4K versus a 1080p panel, you at some certain distance, 3 times the screen height or whatever it is, nobody can tell the difference.
Right, it's diminishing returns, right?
Right.
Right.
And then push it through Comcast, Charter, or Verizon, and you don't know.
That's
anything.
right.
So
Right.
at that point, I don't care.
I think the value of the 8K is the acquisition, and that's what Stacy hit upon. You're basically future-proofing yourself.
Right.
You're able to do distribution in multiple formats for phones, for cinema.
And actually, a lot of our clients, I didn't think this would happen, but a lot of our clients, when they transitioned into 4K, and that's been happening over the last couple of years, they are doing a lot with it in post. They're always punching in a little bit, and it just gives them some flexibility. And I guess 8K gives you 4 times the flexibility. So.
Yeah, we've got a question from back here.
Yeah, hi, I wasn't here in the beginning, so excuse me. Can you tell me what Avid was showing at the show and NewTek? I know in the midst of the NAB, NewTek was acquired.
Yeah.
And have there been any new introductions?
Yeah, so let's talk new tech first, and then we'll tackle the Avid question shortly. So Bob, why don't you take the new tech question since we
I
talked
want
about
to be
that.
there. I want to see how this works out. This is the most academic, elitist company there is in Norway has bought the scroungiest bunch of people who run with things in San Antonio. This is going to be more interesting than when Discrete and Autodesk merged.
It has nothing to do with television.
Yeah, it just, the culture of these two companies is just so different. And it turns out that the thing that VizRT wanted from NewTek is the NDI technology. Wow, professors have to sit there and buy technology from what they consider hobbyists. This is going to be very interesting. But it also goes to show a little bit that, you know, the tail is wagging the dog a little bit. This sort of IP, consumerish type of technology is the future. I mean, we really are entering an age of YouTube. And I also want to say something on the other issue where my opinion was not requested. Our most popular show is the city council meetings, the zoning meetings, the building committee meetings for the new high school, which is $3 million over budget, that kind of stuff. And, you know, we could do this in higher and higher quality. And then one of the vendors of computer services to municipalities showed me the approach they take. And the approach they take is, yes, they run the video of the meeting, and it occupies a little bit of space in the corner. And then the majority of the pane is with a picture of whatever document they're discussing. So if you're watching over the internet, sort of like your zoning committee meeting, while they're discussing the third paragraph in the wording, you can follow along in the text what they're talking about. And in addition, if you happen to be a lawyer who applied for a liquor permit and you want to see how the discussion went, they keep track of the agenda items. And just, you probably noticed, YouTube has queues. All these services have queues now. So you can just sit there and click on, you know, discussion over liquor permit, item 7. And you go directly to the discussion, and you see the document and the resolution of whatever went. And this is really the difference between the traditional attitude we're taking of television, which is, you know, video with a little bit of sound, to now video and audio really just part of the entire presentation to the viewer, which can also include, you know, physical objects that are being discussed and whatever. And I think this is going to have a big impact on us. In my case, because government meetings are the things that interest our viewership. But I think this is going to happen in other areas too.
Well, it's the, you know, it's an outgrowth of interactive television, right?
Yeah.
But it's PC-based interactive television.
Yeah, and you start adding in the personalization that's coming. I mean, that's where Google and Amazon are really going to be. Either we have to partner with them or figure out how to use some of the tools that they're building, because that personalized environment, we can't continue to manually provide what we provide in a world that's coming where we have to provide something to each of you in the room. That's going to be impossible. So the cloud, AI, the interactive experience that you're talking about is all stuff that we're thinking about, I guess. And we're looking for partnerships with different companies to help us provide that, because we can't build it ourselves.
So I think what you're hitting on is fragmentation.
Yeah.
Right, so it's audience fragmentation. But I also heard that it sounded like the theme of NAB was fragmentation in many regards, right? The technology fragmenting in different directions to different audiences. Is that a fair assessment there? Or is that a stretch?
Well, if you get the opportunity, there's an article, I've got it here actually, that the Cronkite School did. It was their 5 takeaways from the NAB. And one of them, I think the first one, I think, is the swim lanes are gone, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really true. And they're talking more about the media swim lanes, but I think on the technology side, definitely, that stuff is all just dissolved.
Yeah.
It's really getting confusing.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. I haven't forgot about the Avid question there, and in fact, before the meeting began, Bob and I were talking about the evolution of digital video editing over the years, and there was a time when Avid was one of the main topics of discussion during this NAB wrap-up. They were the 800-pound gorilla, and you know, at one point they were the only game in town for broadcast editing and high-end production house editing and so forth. And then over time, Final Cut Pro became the kind of dominant force, interestingly enough. And then it was Adobe, Adobe Premiere, and so forth. And in reading some of the things that I came across that came out of this year's NAB, Blackmagic, apparently the DaVinci Resolve product has received high accolades. So I'm not sure where Avid is in the grand scheme of things nowadays when it comes to NAB, but perhaps our panelists can chime in on what they saw and what they know of Avid nowadays. John, you want to take that?
Well, they came out with a new version of Media Composer, and is it too little, too late? I'm not sure, because Avid hasn't been in the fabric of new generations of editors coming into the marketplace. You know, in my experience, it's just Avid has been entrenched in the broadcast worlds and perhaps in major motion picture in that world. But, you know, for the people who are coming into the industry, people that I see every day, it's been Premiere for the last few years, and before that Final Cut Pro, until they went to version 10, and then everybody scrambled looking for somewhere else to go, and that's when Premiere was just ready for them. So I'm not sure whether it's going to take, and whether Avid knows what to do with a new generation of content creators. Remains to be seen.
I mean, do we know what Avid's strategy is at this point in terms of either growing their business or expanding their offerings, or does, and I know we used to have a fairly good-sized contingent of Avid people in the audience. I don't know if there's any Avid people in the audience tonight, but, you know, is there anything you can share with us on that front? Probably not in a public forum.
Yeah, we've signed some NDAs, so I can't really say, but
Yeah.
there's a new interface for Media Composer and so forth. We're actually embarking on a major uplift of our interplay and cloud services, other servers, and Nexus storage and so forth,
Yeah.
on and on. So.
And Avid was at NAB, is that correct?
They still have a
booths,
big booth, they still have the fluffy carpet. You know, it's one of the best
Yes.
carpets on the floor.
Wow.
I actually wanted to respond, John, to your observation. When we're interviewing young, when I say young, you know, right out of college, 1 or 2 years, yeah, they know Premiere, yeah, they know Final Cut, but they actually, by the time they're coming to interview with us, they know Avid. They've intentionally have gone out of the way to spend whatever the EDU price is for an Avid copy. I don't know if it's $99 or whatever. It's cheap. And so if they're going to come to a poster production house like ours, they actually go to the trouble and learn Avid. Otherwise, they know they don't stand a chance of getting hired.
So Avid still has a niche in terms of the high-end production, high-end broadcast, and so forth, but Adobe Premiere is certainly in the mix in that space as well.
I mean,
Right.
You know what surprised me? You know, sort of like these companies made full versions of their products, then they made express versions of their products, and now the applications that people are using on their phones, which is the next platform, they're for the most part not using another version of these products. I don't think there is a version of Photoshop for the iPhone. I look at what people who'd make their media with the phones, they're using these much smaller things that are almost like one menu item out of whatever the application is that they buy on the phone for $5. And so we're not seeing sort of like a gradual flow of applications to different markets. On the phone, it seems to be new small little applications.
Because they solve problems one at a time.
Yeah, it may just be that works better on the phone. But it is interesting to me that when I sit there and ask them, well, what are you doing to adjust the coloring or stuff like that, that they're pulling out all these crazily named things like Screw It and, you know.
We're an Avid shop, and I mean, we're constantly, and we have a great relationship with Avid, I will say. But we're always challenging them as to their product initiatives. Cloud is one of them. You know, I think we feel like, and I'm not talking bad about the company, but we feel like their cloud product is something that we can replicate cheaper than what they can offer it for. And so we're doing that. We're not really buying into the brand anymore. We're figuring it out on our own in some cases, so in some ways. So there's that too. I think we're using the pieces we want.
Right.
And it's, you know, somewhat commoditized at this point.
And by its nature, cloud has to be open, right? So there is no proprietary.
Special sauce.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Where the cloud, I think, comes into it, the service that Amazon offers, AWS, is basically a computational service. You get the equivalent of 1,000 PCs to do things like process orders or crunch bits or stuff like that. So, for example, the company that made that player for municipal meetings that I was talking about, they implemented on AWS, on the cloud service that they offer. And because you have this available to you, you can offer a pretty seriously computationally intensive service without an investment. You just basically are renting these computers by the minute. And as a result, a lot of people can now make these highly specialized applications that they don't have to put up a big upfront cost to develop.
Yeah, I'll give a really quick story on the cloud. And we've got now close to 38,000 HD titles in the cloud that are all topped and tailed, ready for automation, that we do through this service that we've created. We had to do an audio profile change. That's all in a cloud platform that Sony actually built on Amazon. We had to transcode those 38,000 titles. To build that infrastructure for us and the time that it would have taken to transcode those files would have been ridiculously expensive. We did 35,000 titles in 3 days for $8,000. We transcoded them all.
Wow.
You can't, I mean,
Wow. All on virtual machines that are in data centers where you don't even,
Elastic, you spun them
Yeah.
up. We used Sony's transcoder that was on Amazon's cloud. We transcoded them and down the road we went.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And then, you're not stuck with these transcoders that you wouldn't need to me, there's a number of people say they can't afford the cloud. I don't know how you can afford not to be quite honest.
Right.
It's
I did read something about encoding.com had a presence out at NAB. I don't know if you guys, which is cloud-based transcoding, but specific. One of the things I want to transition to right now is, shopping lists. Were any of you guys out there shopping? And what were you shopping for? John, you represent, broadcast rentals and equipment of that type. So tell us what you were out there looking at specifically, and did you find what you were looking for, or were you disappointed that the companies didn't have exactly what you were looking for?
I think I saw everything I went out there to see. The big trend in my part of the world is large format cameras and the lenses to cover those image formats. There's been a big push for much larger frames, and in order to accommodate that, you need lenses that are bigger, heavier, more resolute, and so there's a lot of people who are coming out with new lenses for that format. Arri came out with their new Mini LF large format camera, and there was a lot of that kind of thing. And what's funny is that the trend is that you have a bigger camera, larger frames, and it hurts you to look at how beautiful and accurate the pictures are that come from that. So everybody's making all these lenses now that are that introduce chromatic aberration, that are soft at the edges, are much softer on the human face. So while we're getting better and better images out of our cameras, the lens manufacturers are trying to negate that to a certain extent, because the sharper the cameras are, the less pleasing and organic the image can be.
So the quality of the optics is not keeping up with the quality of the sensors?
No, intentionally the optics are being detuned.
Really?
Yeah.
I think if you watch the 8K presentation of sumo wrestling and the HK thing, you'd see why you want to dull it down a little.
But I thought you could do that in software.
You can, I suppose, but to do it in camera is just the cleanest way to do it.
Okay.
People are using anamorphic lenses a lot these days, and some are rehoused versions of really old vintage lenses that were used in Hollywood's heyday. There was a guy there who had the original blueprints for the Bausch & Lomb Super Baltars that Orson Welles used in Citizen Kane, for instance. And he remanufactured them using new glass and new techniques, because the old glass, it's been around all these years and it's all yellow and pitted, and plus they made it with radioactive materials and some toxic materials. So he had redesigned these lenses, and they're absolutely beautiful, but in a way that that makes the images seem less real. And when you're looking for that kind of separation from the material, that's what you want. You want a little bit of distance from what the camera is seeing, and those lenses provide that. So modern mechanics, you can use all the up-to-date follow focus devices and stuff, but the lenses, they look kind of crappy, but that's great. It's beautiful.
So did you find what you were looking for?
Yeah, I did. I like those lenses a lot, the ones that I just described by a company called White Point Optics.
What does a set of primes cost?
Oh, God. We used to have a set of Canon K35 lenses, which were I don't know, maybe 30 years old, something like that. And I remember saying, we got to get rid of these things. They're crap. We're moving on, and this would have been in the early 80s, I think. And I think we sold the set for $1,000. Today, those lenses are worth $200,000.
You got a good deal.
Because they only made so many. And that's exactly the look that people are trying to find right now.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is the economics there. I mean, they've gone to a different lens amount now. It's an LPL instead of a PL. It's a larger sensor. It's a larger set of lenses. It's $100,000 for a set of primes.
Yeah.
Is the economics there for you?
From a rental perspective, it is. A camera, if I look at a window of relevance for any product that I carry in my inventory, on the camera side, it's going to be a couple of years, 3 years, maybe, before something else comes along to replace it.
But now you don't sell them. You put them in storage, right? And wait
Yeah,
for them to
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I lend them to Paul Beck for 30 or 40 years. And yeah, but on the lens side, I have Zeiss super speed lenses in my inventory now that are really popular, and I have owned them for 30 years. And so you can expect that kind of return. So it's not priced as aggressively, because you're going to have it, and it's going to return the investment over a much longer period of time. But that's okay in the case of lenses, because you don't have to worry about they being obsolete.
Yeah, I saw an online shout out for Canon lenses at the show, as well as Atlas lenses.
Yeah.
Did they get good reviews in what I saw?
Yeah, I have a set of those.
Okay.
And so Atlas is a company that out of nowhere came up with a set of anamorphic lenses. Again, because people are using Alexas and Venices, and they feel that anamorphic gives it just a little bit of a nudge towards being old school, to be able to have a nice little flare that appears cinematic. And 10 years ago, we're all hiding from flares and trying to mitigate them as best we can, and now we're embracing them. But I think there's something in terms of more job shops being out there, more small machine shops that are able to put out really good work, so all of a sudden you can manufacture a nice modern set of lenses because the manufacturing capabilities are there, and you can find them in any city. So more and more people are being entrepreneurial and taking advantage of that.
Interesting. Stacy, were you out there shopping for anything, or were you just there for the ATSC roundup?
Honestly, I think shopping for relationships more so than anything.
Yeah,
Is what I would say.
yeah. No, that's
I think
good.
that's still the best place to go to talk to everybody, and so we weren't really we weren't buying much, to be honest. We've gone through the Spectrum auction. Emmerich is busy as he can be, replacing antennas and transmitters. So we didn't have any big purchases this year, but it's really keeping ourselves familiar with what the industry is doing, which is hard. As you pointed out, there's a lot of new companies out there. But honestly, we've found such great value in creating good, strong relationships with different companies, and not a vendor-client relationship, but actually a partnership in providing services and developing new technology. That's the kind of stuff that we're looking. And honestly, I'm looking for companies that want to do that.
But
I would prefer
on
it.
the distribution front, right? A content distribution?
All
or-
kinds of stuff, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, really, anything. We've got a captioning service. I was out there talking to people about possibly looking at AI to offset some of the loss that we're seeing in the manual captioning. We're not going to build an AI type captioning environment. It's something I'd probably white label and partner with somebody to create and build and offer as a service. There's just a lot of stuff like that.
You know why they're probably so friendly? A lot of well-known places want all the stuff for free.
Yeah.
So, a place that isn't just looking for a lot of handouts is kind of rare.
No, I think we've found, and I'll just say the Sony relationship for the past 5 years has been incredibly valuable to us, and I think just as much to them if you were to ask them. They've learned as much from us as we've learned from them. It's been a valuable partnership, and it is a true partnership. So that's one of, a couple that I could probably reference that we've found value and some progress in having.
Yeah, and I did see a shout out for Sony for their Live Element Orchestrator and their CI Media Log. I don't know if you want to talk about those products at all?
We use C. C is their cloud product that's built on Amazon. It's a great collaboration tool. It's something that we've invested in pretty heavily. The service that I've mentioned a couple times that we provide to 17 other public media stations in the country use it heavily. It's a great storage platform, so people can get, stations can get out of the storage game. One of the most impressive things I saw at NAB, I think, was the crystal LED that Sony had, the 8K by 4K crystal LED. That was unbelievable. I mean, I felt like you could swim in it. It was so pretty. So there's some cool products, not only of Sony but others as well.
So what's the Live Element Orchestrator?
I'm not sure that one is.
Is Steve D
Yeah, where's
still
Steve
there?
at?
or-
Live Event Orchestrator, it's a software system that sits on top of your entire facility. So, for example, you were a production house, at 2 o'clock, you were gonna do a high def thing. You would go into the menus, for example, the camera, the switcher, and change all that thing to be high def. Where at 4 o'clock, you were gonna do a 4K event, it would go into all your stuff and change all that. Whatever menu settings are for that. And it's designed to work off of an IP infrastructure. So if the cameras are IP, the switches are IP, servers, whatever else, it'll go into all this stuff and let you know what's going on, schedule things so it changes at the time of your schedule system. So you can actually connect to a schedule and it will just change based on what your appointment book is.
So would we characterize that under automation, under robotics? Where would that fit?
A new world.
Probably more automation than just controlling other things in your facility.
Yeah.
Like I said, it sits on top of, it's a large management system.
Yeah, and I use the term robotics in a kind of a software sense, right? Whether it's Salesforce or companies like that, the big buzzword is robotics, where they automate kind of the creation of documents through pre-built methods, right? So it's not a manual process anymore with a customer service rep. It's automated, and that's where the term robotics is being used. So it sounded to me like robotics in that perspective.
It's a service bus. Do you know what a service bus is?
I don't.
It's basically just a platform that lives over top of other platforms that allows you to kind of orchestrate.
Okay.
It's an orchestration engine, really. I don't know, that's fair, Steve? It's an orchestration engine. It really orchestrates all your.
It does exactly, it sits on top of everything.
Yep.
Yeah, it will change the settings in all of your equipment based on what you're gonna do at that particular time.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, stations have that level of automation now with roll-ins and everything else. So, why wouldn't you have something like this as well to? Excellent. Okay, very good. Sir, what were you out there looking for to buy?
There, I don't know. We have been shopping for a few years. I talked about it last year, actually. LED lighting. Our students think if it's, if it gets hot, it isn't, new or good anymore. And so, we've been beating up these Lowell lighting kits that are older than our students. And so we were out on the quest again, trying to find the replacement, and we're biting the bullet on something that's okay. It's not great. But that's always been a quest of ours. We're also really looking at our lower mid-tier cameras that, high volume and low cost. So right now it's 6-year-old DSLRs, it's Canon C100s, the original version, and we were trying to find the replacement. We were surprised Canon hasn't done anything on the camera side for a couple of years. So we're maybe kicking the can down the road one more year. There's a couple C100 options from other manufacturers. We kind of like Panasonic's Evo 1 is an option for, again, the digital cinema style student. And then an eye on one of our broadcast facilities, our television studios, is 8-9 years old now. So that infrastructure is starting to hit end of life, and we need to start looking at what's our new control room, and is it UHD, is it HDR? Does HDR matter in a news control room? It kind of doesn't feel like it, but can we build something that's not at this time? So that was more on our research side.
So are you guys adopting any of the things that it's happening in the rail world now at rail stations, whether it's, cloud initiatives or anything like that? Is there any?
There's a push for it. So, we bought a Telestream Vantage transcoding server, 5-8 years ago. So, that's a local cloud, but the next iteration of it, rather than replacing the hardware, probably something in the cloud. There's always the idea of, the big one for us is, storage, obviously, and transcode. If there's a solution where we can start running our computer labs on VMs and, we're working in the cloud that way, it's something we'd look at. But, right now, we still live with a lot of islands where we are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You mentioned cameras, and I saw call-outs for some of these JVC handhelds, connected cams, they were calling. Did any of you guys see these cameras out there, and what are your thoughts on that? It seems like it's made for the streaming.
It is. One of them, I don't remember if it's that one, has a built-in IFB return as well. So you've got a small compact camcorder that, you can throw a cell modem on it with a USB port and stream back home and get a return path for IFB. And
wow.
JVC is really good for the backpack journalist. They've got a lot of good options there. They definitely have a good series of options there.
Yeah, the GY-HC 550 was the camera that I saw mentioned there, and and they started that several years ago with their first version of that connected cam that was able to stream live and so forth. So might not have that utility for a traditional broadcast environment, but for students and so forth that are.
Yeah, and something that could hit the public access market too is one of their cameras has a built-in interface with Daktronics, which is one of the common scoreboard applications, and so they can do a scorebug overlay within the camera and stream it back.
Yeah,
So
we have one.
Yeah.
We have that. We have LED lighting, and we have virtual editing machines. I can tell you about all of them.
As a consultant.
I can just tell you.
Well, that's interesting. All right. So, Jerry, what about you? Were you out there shopping?
I'd sort of go in the category of what Stacy was talking about relationships, because that's a good part of what we have. And I'd say that in some ways because it used to be that NAB for me was broken up into a couple of different categories. I used to call it the three different days in NAB. The first was the Stations of the Cross, where you went around and you had to visit people. Sorry, Steve, that you weren't in that group. I always like to see Steve. But you have that. And then the second day is sort of like the fallout things, the things that you maybe got in email or whatever, whatever, leading up to the show and things that you probably wanted to check out. And then the third day was a Zen walk, which was, around the periphery and looking for funny, odd, weird little companies that, more times than not would be the ones that you would connect with and start doing something with. My day now, because we're out at TechCon beforehand, is shorter at NAB, and I'm doing the Zen walk. I'd always love to see Steve, although I didn't see him this year, but sorry, Steve. But the whole idea about paying attention to the smaller companies that are there has paid off for us. The cloud work that we're doing right now, we're working, and not to make a commercial of it, but the guys, this is a great company, is a company, Backblaze, that is a percentage of the cost for cloud storage for any of the major, for either Microsoft or Google or Amazon. And they've also been really interested in working with us too, because we're one of a few broadcast clients, a couple in public media, who've started working with them. The Austin City Limits Archive is built in their cloud storage. And they have a lot of advantages of cloud storage, but in an affordable way, and it was allowed us, to, with our budget, to be able to get into doing what we wanted to do. And it's really changed our workflow entirely. So I'm sort of looking for those. The one area that I was looking at this year, talk about AI, and the joke was that when I came back last year from NAB, it was like I was going to AI everything. My cereal had AI and everything else because everybody else did. But really, it's the idea. But now that we have cloud storage and a cloud library, looking at indexing using video, audio, and captioning in the content, and trying to get more value out of the content that we have, and trying to use that. And there are some tools that are coming along. They're still largely with the sort of the major companies, but there are some smaller ones coming in as well, and those are the ones that I'm going to be looking for, I think, because I can afford it. Or bringing somebody to the network that I now get established with my cloud storage provider and a number of different companies that do integrations with them, to bring other companies in to do integration to get what I need. So that's really where I've been at. Last one, though, I will mention, and nobody's mentioned 5G. I can't believe that we got this far into the conversation without 5G being mentioned. I'm really interested in seeing the conversations about 5G and ATSC 3.0. Sinclair clearly has been doing their thing, and I'm not going to take any sides on anything here, but I really am interested in really looking at it and seeing what does happen with this. The whole idea about looking at companies that are getting bringing together a combination of both broadcast and OTT in different kinds of environments. The 5G ATSC 3.0 combination could be sort of interesting. But I'll also say that the ATSC 3.0 features could be very interesting as well. And my last point is that in looking for relationships and how to do things differently, we've engaged with Dolby in trying to find out a little bit more about AC4 within ATSC 3.0 and looking at some of the engagement tools that could be there for audio and trying to figure out how people would actually produce using those and how we would actually distribute them.
So what's the promise of these features, whether we're talking ATSC 3.0 or 5G? As a consumer, what's the promise?
5G has
Where's
the
value
potential of
there?
a big fat pipe. That's again, we can drill down on this and debunk things and go through marketing stuff and tear it apart. But the potential is for a very big pipe. The question is, of course, people have different opinions about the deployment of 5G over time. How long is it going to take? I think that the timelines may not be right, but I think it's going to happen. And it's and then with Sinclair.
Do you think they're going to get over the distance limitations? There seems to be a lot of concern about distance limitations with 5G.
You have to build a totally different kind of network of cells. So that's what's really going to be required. There's a lot of talk about it. It was there at NAB. There was more talk, of course, about the 40 or so markets that are talking about launching 3.0 services and doing all getting there. And I go to that one for a second too, because I was through the first round of things actually working at GBH at the time, and when ATSC 1.0 came in, and we had some ideas about accessibility and different kinds of things that could happen with audio in 1.0, and they never really got fully realized. There is some chance that it might happen in 3.0 again. And there's one thing that I saw that there was a Verance Dolby and KPBS in San Diego did a test just prior to NAB of delivering alternate audio by way of the internet, synced with a broadcast, and looking at, again, marketing, is it real? Does it scale? I don't know. But the idea that, again, the walls are breaking down and that there are more ways to be able to see how to deliver different kinds of services to a home.
Right.
That might be broadcast, they might be broadband, they might be wireless, they could be a number of different things.
Right. So Stacy, when it comes to 3.0, in your opinion, when it's fully implemented, what's that going to mean for us?
I hope for us it means another revenue stream. I don't think, I'm not as excited about the user experience as I am the opportunity to partner with people to potentially use our pipes, our one-to-many delivery system to deliver data to ATM machines or to, what another tool that's a purpose-built technology that Google decides to build, some sort of receiver into, an Alexis-type device or something like that. I think what we've got is something the internet can't provide. All of us have cell phones, right? When an Apple update comes out, you get one, a couple days later, I get the option, invited to do the update. I can push a button and get to 7 million people like that, right? And so my ability to deliver information, well, it's not huge amounts of information, but my ability to deliver information one-to-many is way better than the internet. And
So it's a scalability issue.
Absolutely.
I mean, so 3.0 just scales up incredibly compared to.
Well, and remember, the 3.0 is the internet too, in addition to broadcast. I mean, and that's the area too that I think that our company is sort of interested in watching, because we've had some inquiries from suppliers. We have about, I don't know, maybe 300 different program suppliers, and a couple of them pretty major and doing things like travel programs and cooking programs, for the travel particularly, those guys I think have been really sort of catching on earlier, that there's something there that maybe I could take advantage of.
Yeah.
And one idea might be that you might be able to have collateral with a program, with the traditional broadcast program. That might be something like a 360 video in an environment that somebody hasn't been in before, and you may be able to find a way to deliver that to the home.
So will we see the monetization of digital over-the-air broadcasts?
What do you mean?
So what I mean by that is, so I cut the cord. I no longer pay for cable. I get all my stuff over the air,
God
or
forbid.
what's that?
God forbid. Don't put that idea out of your head right away.
But the
just have
funny
to work
thing
a
is,
deal with Stacey.
the amazing thing is, the number of channels I get is amazing.
Yeah.
I get the Comet channel.
Yeah.
I get the Charge channel. I get all these obscure kind of
Which one
networks
did you
now.
choose?
I'm sorry?
Which one did you like YouTube TV? Are you doing something like that, or? Are you
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But
the price on
for
that-
the-
But
for
you're
the
talking
mo-
about over the
But
air.
for the most part, I mean, the free over-the-air
You're
TV
talking about
kind of
over the
fits
air, yeah.
fits most of my requirements. I'm a news junkie, so news is free. Will it remain free, I guess, in this,
Well, full disclosure, being a distributor of 1.5 of the public television dot channels, we work with GBH and WNET for both the Create channel and for World.
Right.
And, I mean, those channels are pretty important, and we hear that all the time. We hear about the cord cutters actually sort of seeing those channels. And
Yeah, I mean,
and really,
well, commercial, I can't speak for commercial broadcasters, obviously, but I mean, we've got a charter to make sure that our stuff is still free, and so it's, I don't ever see a world where we might deliver something different to a member than we will a non-member.
Okay.
And what I might do there is, rather than have members sit through a fund drive or a pledge drive, I might wipe all that out and deliver members the ability to watch without a pledge drive, if that's possible. So that's.
I'd pay
that's
for
the-
that.
Yeah, some people would.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah, that's
painful, I
That's
know.
what we would hope.
Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. What else in terms of the promise of 3.0 that, from a broadcast plant perspective?
Yeah, at the minimum, if it's implemented, at the minimum, you get better quality TV and audio. That's at the minimum. I think the sky's the limit at the opportunities that could, potentially present themselves if it's fully implemented and realized to its full capacity. So I wish I had a crystal ball, because I
Yeah.
would be all over it. I think it does have legs. I think it's got potential. I think, and Jerry and I had a conversation kind of before we sat down. If I was sitting in front of a group of people that were all broadcasters, what I would say is I think you got to draw a line between content and technology almost anymore. In order for 3.0 to be completely utilized 100% to its capacity, we can continue to compete on content all we want, but we have to work together on technology. No more mission in technology, no more, rivalries in technology. We have to work together to bring our transmitters into a cohesive network across the country. And if we can do that, we can compete with anybody, in my opinion. So and that's the thing I really hope for.
What's happening in Phoenix and with Pearl and some other places too, I think there's maybe not exactly the total frictionless kind of environment for that, but it is happening. And I think a lot of people are really sort of getting onto that idea, that, yeah, I would agree with what Stacy said.
Okay,
That's the
excellent.
thing and I don't know if there's any Sinclair folks in the audience, but it's almost the approach that Sinclair is making is a little bit, I would argue differently, that there probably would be more successful if they looked at partnering with a bigger group of people than trying to create their own network within the country, because if they got everybody together, it would be.
So what's their rationale for doing that? I mean,
They own it. They've got the biggest footprint outside of public media, so they can have an end-to-end single frequency network from Boston to LA. You could, in theory, drive a car all the way across country and watch the same program and never know you left, right?
Wow.
And public broadcasting has the same opportunity. Now, single frequency networks are a whole nother animal, but ATSC 3.0 does present that opportunity where 1.0 did not.
Okay. Does it present more channel opportunity for local stations,
25
more than the
megabits.
channels that they have now?
Yeah, you've got 25 megabits and better compression. Now we have 19.39, and so, yeah, you could definitely fit more into less. You can
Okay.
partner, you can do channel sharing arrangements, there's a lot of stuff you can do.
But there's
Wow.
a real need for everybody to stay a little bit, grounded and real on this too. I mean, there's one thing, you have to dream big, but you also have to look at what some of the realities of this are. I mean, it's not limitless, but it does open up a whole lot of new doors.
Yeah, in the conversations we've had in the past was stations in smaller markets that don't have the budgets to afford, a lot of this emerging technology. So has that come up in any of these discussions? Where, are any stations going to be left behind here, or?
So there's currently a group of folks that we work with at Wgbh that have gone out and raised, I think, about $4 billion to invest in a single frequency network across the country. And they're working with multiple broadcasters, including public broadcasters, to actually fund the deployment of that technology in exchange for access to the bandwidth.
Okay.
So I think in that case, I think you'll see the opportunity for small stations to be part of the solution, to be real.
But they're going to have to make deals to make that
Of
happen,
course.
right? Yeah.
And,
yeah.
and again, the infrastructure is not going to follow the old models. The infrastructure, and it shouldn't. The idea that, that what you have to own to get to provide those services may be very different over time. And how you can wind up sharing facilities and sharing costs,
Yeah,
hopefully, is going
yeah.
to be different.
Interesting.
Got to twist your brain a little bit in this deal.
Yeah, it's hard to get your head wrapped around this.
One person said it to me, and I felt like they said it the best. The hardest thing about 3.0 is going to be forgetting entirely what 1.0 was. And there's a lot. I've been in broadcasting
some ways it's
22
true.
years, and I'm a new guy. So
Right.
So there's a lot of folks who've really been ingrained in the broadcast world that are going to have a hard time really wrapping their head around what this thing might do.
Wow. Very cool, very cool. I'm just going to shout out some things that I came across in reading about the latest NAB. And, if you guys can comment on it, if you know about it, please do so. Make.tv, newsroom in the cloud. Did anyone come across that, and do you have any comments about that? Anyone in the audience? Okay. It was high on the list of one of the rags I looked at. So Make.tv is something we should look at. Teradek had a 4K wireless video device. John's shaking his head. You want to talk a little bit about that? Or was
Yeah,
that one of your pick hits?
No.
Okay.
No. But, Teradek makes a ton of video transmitters that are now in use on pretty much every camera package that we send out. And they have a new 4K device that takes a feed off the camera and transmits it to Video Village or Director's Viewfinder or whoever wants to see the image. And it worked. It looked pretty good.
What's its range? What frequency does it use? Is it legal?
Oh, yeah. It's definitely legal. 500 feet or so.
Yeah.
And I forget how much it cost, but I'm also not sure why we needed it.
What problem was it solving?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, plus it's only 4K.
Yeah,
Right?
right,
I mean,
right.
we need wireless 8K.
I think along those lines, though, the other thing that was interesting, though, is, Vitek Group bought everybody, but they own Small HD now, and they own Teradek, and they got those two companies together in I think they're calling it Creative Solutions, and they've actually started embedding the transmitters in the Small HD monitors. So, we've dealt with students, we built these wireless directors kits, so your DP is at the camera with the 5-inch monitor, and the director's over there with their little 7-inch monitor. And it's been a struggle with our students configuring it and getting it up and going, because they have to put the two different pieces together and then the two pieces together there and get them synced up. And this new partnership that they've created with the new Teradek, I think it's Bolt. It's just a much easier plug and play. It's all integrated right away, and so it's making it easier. Like, how much you need it? Good question, but they've made it easier, which has been great.
It sounds like it's begging for an iPhone app.
They were
To do that.
Well, there is
of
something
course.
that does that, yeah.
They were enormously successful. A rep that I visited once had just become the rep for Teradek, and he would go and visit all these TV stations, and I tagged along, and he would just drop these samples off at the engineers' offices. And he'd come back the next visit, the engineer said, "Yes, I'll buy a dozen." Then he thought he could sell switchers that way, and that didn't work so well.
Just drop it in the office.
Well, there was another company that was mentioned in the same realm as the wireless video, Visalink. Is that a competitor to Teradek? Did anyone see Visalink's wireless video solution out there?
We've worked with them in the past, but I don't have a lot
Yeah.
of information on.
Okay. We talked about. Go
Can I
ahead.
address something he said? You were saying you were thinking of the LED lights.
Yep.
You were thinking of the virtual machines, and one other thing that I've forgotten, and we have them all.
Yep.
I can't say enough good things about the LED lights. You no longer have to worry about the bulbs burning and telling the people to shut the lights off. Plus, the options you get, you can really color them and whatever. So I am a big fan of them. The other thing that is nice with them, which actually isn't related, but it's just turned out to be nice, is my predecessor at this place, Adam, bought some software, I think it's called D-Pro, and it allows the people to sort of set the lighting arrangements for their shows. Plus, you can also get sliders, but this makes it very intuitive for the show producers at an access station, not terribly sophisticated, to create and adjust their lighting. So I would say the combination of those two are definitely worth exploring, but snobs will sniff at your software. The virtual machines, I am not a big fan of. It made sense to get them. I understand the logic, but it just adds an extra layer of complexity. And so it's just more fragile and easier to screw up and stuff like that. I am more a fan, may not apply to you, of maybe just buying a whole bunch of gaming computers and putting them in with, networking and stuff like that, and try and build all your infrastructure like that, because I'm really convinced that the gaming laptop, like the Asus gaming Republic of Gamers machine, is going to be a basic building block for all of this type of functionality. And you're going to be able to use the laptop for streaming, for switching, for everything. And
But
so-
in education, it's Macintosh, right?
Yes, but not completely. There was one Macintosh and three PCs in that lab that we put some new stuff in. So not so much anymore. I think that was from in the past.
Well, and we haven't gotten a new Mac Pro in how many years? It's
Right.
So that's one of the things that we've struggled with. We have,
The problem with the
many
Macintosh,
labs, yeah.
from my point of view only, all of you, the dog is there. The problem with the Macintosh, I think, is that the company has found something better. They found these phones, and just that it's very hard to make the profit margins on these computers when they can make so much more money with the phones. And I can just imagine that product manager's presentation at the staff meeting, how many billion did you make? How many, $1,000 did you make? That guy's going to have a hard time. The other thing is to make these powerful computers, you have to make them fat so that the processor heat can be dissipated and you can put the physical processor in there. And all of the Macintosh computers are they want them to be stylish and slim.
Well, they're still Intel-based, but there's always been these rumors that they'll go to, the chipset that they use in their phones, right? Which runs cooler, runs more efficient, energy saving, and so forth.
But these really
So
they're really powerful processors that you're going to need if you're going to do a lot of computation. To do the effects, to do the compression, to do the decoding of all these IP streams you're having coming in.
which the ARM processors are capable of doing.
I think that the platform that does it best are these gaming platforms with their GPUs. Those things are powerful enough to do pretty much everything you might want to do. They're very cheap and affordable. They're portable. The form factor is nice. You can take them around. I think this is going to be the building block of the future. You may disagree.
No, that's fine.
Question. Last year, several vendors were pushing virtual reality.
We are at the Access
Virtual
Station
reality, vendors last year were pushing virtual reality, and, several years ago, vendors were pushing 3D video. And 3D video had, a lot of excitement for a year or two, and then went down. So did you guys see any virtual reality demonstrations out there? Or there's probably a lot more augmented reality than virtual reality, I would guess.
We had a meeting. We had a Smpte meeting on virtual reality in Brookline. And as a result of that, we at Belmont bought a system. And it is at Access, we're sort of looking for a new mission. YouTube has stolen a lot of our thunder. And the virtual reality has come almost, I would say, is the closest thing to having the same type of promise.
So explain, providing someone the ability to feel like they're at a town meeting?
No. Not that they would.
Help me out here.
For you, but there's a 360-degree camera you can use. If you like, we'll put it in the town meeting for you.
So you can turn your back on people.
Yeah. It allows you to experience a lot of things. For example, Google Earth, you can actually pretend like you're walking the streets of your hometown.
Right, yeah.
There is a lot of, educational stuff, like, exploring the galaxies and the moon, stuff like that. I think at one of the big meetings, they had you buy a whole package and you get 50 different, let's call them games. But for an Access Station, it provides something for people that they want to know about, learn about, how to program. The language turns out not to be that difficult to write, to code in. And I suspect there's going to be, authoring applications pretty soon. And so it's an interesting technology. And if you're an Access Station, you're looking for some new mission to be sort of pursuing, it's a promising one.
But as far as the NAB show is concerned,
I don't think there was
almost
probably,
non-existent.
I wasn't at NAB, but I don't think there was a lot.
Yeah.
There's a whole separate universe for that.
Yeah.
So, a couple of years ago, John, there was a big push to provide, different tools for capturing immersive video and so forth. Is that part of your offering in the rental business?
Well, we rode that trend
Okay.
as it went up, and it started with a couple of really expensive cameras.
That had multiple lenses and sensors on them and all
Yep.
sorts of crazy things, right?
And it started with 10 GoPros in a rig, and then
That's
you'd have
right.
stitching software to put it all together. And then there was higher end products like Nokia came out with this thing called Ozo, which was a $60,000 camera originally, and next year was $45,000. Next year was 15, and then they dropped the product entirely. But
Yeah, we bought a Nikon camera that basically has lenses on two sides, and I forgot what it cost, but it wasn't a lot.
yeah, and there's a lot of cameras like that right now on the consumer side, and they're pretty decent. The one company that sort of has stuck through all of this is a company called Insta360, and I think they're a Chinese company, and they make great cameras. So the most expensive one that they came out with this year was $15,000, but they were the only high-end VR on the show floor, as far as I could see.
There was a China pavilion, and I happened to walk through one day anyway, and there were a couple of interesting small companies there too, and with some product with 360 and 3D cameras for really low, consumer price points. And I have to say, I sort of went out of curiosity, but then put the glasses on and took a look at what was being presented to me, and it was rather impressed.
Yeah.
The resolution on those kinds of products too coming up. That's always been part of the problem.
There's
about
actually an
catching
interesting
it.
show on PBS right now called, Ancient Cities or whatever it is, where they use VR. And it's pretty amazing, if anyone's seen the show here, where they put on the VR headset and they're totally immersed in this rendition of the city or the structure that they're exploring. And to be able to do that at home would be amazing. So
Yeah, I would say that I've seen more on the VR side at CES than I've seen at NAB.
Yeah.
So there's
I
more,
would-
Yeah, and
more
that makes
consumer
sense,
product.
right?
The
Yeah.
problem I think the bottleneck right now for VR is authoring the presentations. The language is sort of like writing a web page in HTML. There's nothing comparable to Dreamweaver yet. There's little fits and starts. So I would say this is something to keep your eye on and then to see how it goes. But it has promise.
Yeah.
It's not for everything either, right? So that's the other piece, is it's a niche thing.
Right. Before the meeting started, there was some folks that were, it looked like they had a 3D camera. Was one of these boys right here, perhaps? So what is that? I saw you playing with it, and
It just came in today. It's a DJI Memo, M-I-M-O. Obviously, DJI, from their drones, has figured out the gimbals really well. So it's basically a 4K gimbal camera that you can walk around.
that's amazing.
You know what the biggest problem is?
That's
shooting
not
with-
intended to capture immersive 360 video, or is it?
So it does have a mode where you can, like a follow me mode, so it will spin around and look at you and track your face and do that.
So it's got a facial recognition component? Does it tie into your iPhone?
Yep, so it has a plug to go into either an Android or an iPhone. So the application, I'm from Foxborough Cable Access.
Okay.
So we have a group of students who are going to Australia.
Great.
And so we're going to be giving this to them to use. Obviously, it's very compact, perfect for a travel thing. So we're hoping that, because they're going to be spending over $100,000 to get up there, to be able to document that experience for all the donors and everybody that has contributed to the project.
That's cool.
And this is one of the devices that you can train a high school student to take it when they are traveling, walking around, moving from location to location, or even just to record one of their concerts.
Yeah.
We're going to send them out with a GH5 camera as well.
And I'm sure it has great battery life. It lasts.
Yep, and
yeah.
it has a Type-C connector, so you can charge it the same way you would your cell phone.
Available at B&H.
Yep, really anywhere, Amazon.
What, and the price point of that?
I think it was right around 200.
The name again, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
What's that?
The name again?
Memo, M-I-M-O.
Okay.
Wow.
You know what the big problem is with those when you're taking pictures is you have to hide.
You have to what?
You have to hide. They're 360 degrees. You set it out and you run behind a tree.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty amazing. I mean, let's face it, for a couple of $100 to get that type of experience, that's pretty incredible. All right, we've got about a half hour left here. I do want to get into pick hits and future predictions and so forth. A couple other things that I picked up on today that I'm just going to throw out there, and if anyone saw it. So Cisco had an announcement for what they're calling the IP fabric for media. I don't know what that means. Can someone explain that to me?
I wish I could.
You were shaking your head. but,
I know Cisco really, really well. I've actually said for years that we're probably never going to buy another router, like a Grass Valley router. It's going to be a Cisco is what we'll end up. And now, we live in a world where we have a little of both, actually. We have replaced our router recently, but
Yeah.
they're becoming, you asked a question early on. I manage a fairly large staff, right? And we've worked really hard to integrate the engineering and IT staffs together. But my IT staff is double the size of my engineering staff.
Okay.
And
But your IT staff is supporting
they weren't.
typical IT stuff as well, right?
Yeah, well, they were just typical IT stuff when I got here. I mean,
Okay.
we were doing computers, phones, and, you know, that type of experience. And
Yeah, yeah.
now they're every day involved in the implementation of new technology to help with, you know, whether it's a Cisco experience or Cisco networking platform.
Yeah.
They're doing that where we're moving video around our organization in a different way. So yeah, it's much different, and we've worked really hard. And honestly, the difficulty is finding the talent. We find that we're quite frequently having to hire people, not only young people, hire people, and we hire if they've got the aptitude, not necessarily if they have the knowledge, right? If they have the aptitude, we can teach. And so we've got a pretty stringent way of hiring people that we go through, and because of that, I think we've been really successful. And I'm happy to say we've got a really strong group of people that support our new infrastructure.
So are you recruiting, graduates with computer science degrees from the leading universities here, software developers?
Some are gamers, you know, some are guys and gals who just have a knack for things.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about their education even. It's just, there's been a wide variety, depending on their aptitude, right? If they've got the ability to learn and a real interest. I want people to love what we do. I mean, the reason that broadcasting has been around and been, I think, in my opinion, so successful is because there was such a strong love for that environment, and there was such a big support. People who are involved in broadcasting, I think that always intrigued me were people who were just so passionate about it. They would have done it in their spare time, and they did in their spare time. And they usually got paid $3 an hour because they were putting in 40 hours more a week than they should have been. So you look for that same kind of love across different areas that now are incorporated into the broadcast
Well,
world.
in public broadcasting has a whole different kind of aspect to it, right? You know, it's for the common good, there's education,
That's true, but I will tell you that my most recent saying is that technology has no mission. I would build this plant the same if I were Fox, NBC, CBS, Amazon, Google. I don't care what the mission is, I do. I mean, I'm passionate about public media, but truthfully, I can't build it thinking about what we are. I have to build it to compete with everybody else.
Yeah,
anymore.
no, that's a good point, very good point.
Question back there?
Yeah,
Stacy, I agree with you on the commercial side, fusion of IT and engineering is an ongoing process, and finding people who can be taught and brought along in both.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's not really a question more.
Well, it goes back to, someone being able to wear multiple hats, right? So someone that has networking skills, perhaps some broadcasting skills, combine the two, and
I really am a firm believer in the one thing they have to do is respect one another. Because if they don't, you're gonna see them go this way. And so I commend Emmerich and the gentleman by the name of Shane Miner who works for me. They they're in the same space. They work together and finding that mutual respect for one another. They don't know everything about broadcasting, and broadcasters and engineers don't know everything about IT. But every day they're learning a little bit more, and every day that mesh is starting to look a little bit more.
And I think what it gets back to is the culture of
Yeah.
the organization. And, Bob mentioned culture with New Tech in that other company, Mesh, and it probably wasn't, a good cultural fit between those two companies. But having that
It's
good
gonna be very
culture-
interesting.
Yeah, having a good culture in an organization, whether it's a TV station or what have you, is so important for cohesiveness and everything else.
So all you need to do is to play games, huh?
No. A lot of my staff, they're good. They're gamers, yeah, definitely.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to mention is that, we talked a little bit about Sony and some of the products they had, and I'm sure Sony had a fairly sized booth at NAB. We haven't talked about Panasonic at all. Panasonic's one of the big, or in the past has been one of the big companies at NAB. Did anyone explore Panasonic, and anyone have anything to say about what they saw, and was there anything interesting?
I mean, we touched on it at the very beginning, but they had that 8K setup where, they were doing multiple camera shots out of one source. I think there were 4, and they were doing a line cut, so to speak. They were celebrating 10 years of making PTZ cameras. That was their big thing this year. But they've been doing interesting things there, particularly with IP PTZ cameras. We've been sort of looking at them as a lecture capture type solution because, it's just a easier method. We can control it from one place. We can stream to somewhere if we need to. But they had a big presence. They were pushing, obviously, Varicam. It was, but it didn't feel like there was, other than the 8K piece, I didn't think there was a groundbreaking thing they were doing. Just a big booth, a lot of the same things they've always done, though. They had in the glass box that nobody could touch their new 4K camcorder, ENG camcorder. But, I didn't see a ton.
Is that shipping in the future, or was that?
Presumably.
Was that a prototype, or?
I have a feeling that that's probably the one that they have.
Shipping
One
back
in a row.
maybe now.
Is anyone from Panasonic here? No? Okay.
Well, then let me tell you what I really saw in that.
All right, let's hear it, John.
No. It was fun. It was exactly as Tim said.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing in PTZ cameras is this Onvif control language that they have. It's adopted by a lot of the large PTZ camera manufacturers, and it is much easier to implement than the old Visca language that the biggie broadcasters were using. And I think the nice thing about that is, first of all, it's more inclusive, although some of the functionality is security related, like how to send a signal from a camera for a multi-camera recording on a recorder all over IP. But also because like a camera breaks, you can substitute a different camera in and all the functions will continue to work, like the pan-tilt zoom functions. That's a little bit the plug and play we're used to. The video signal was standardized. Now they're standardizing the control language. And so I think this Onvif technology, while not new, is now going somewhere.
Very good. Before we get into the final stretch here, do we have any questions in the audience? People have been holding on to any questions that they want to ask the panel at this point, or any hands? No? Yeah.
If I want to get rid of my expensive cable TV, what are the latest technologies for doing this?
So why do you want to get rid of your expensive TV? Is it,
Not but just the cable.
Oh, just the cable?
Just the cable, not our beautiful TV, but okay.
You want to cut the cord?
I want to cut the cord. What are my choices?
Yeah, so, there's lots of choices nowadays. So they make great antennas now, flat antennas that you can stick on the wall to get free over-the-air digital TV. And there's lots of channels in that space from all the major broadcasters. When it comes to premium content, that's going to come into your house over the internet. So if you have internet cable coming into your house right now, you can go with YouTube, you can go with Netflix, you can go with Hulu, Philo,
Sling.
Amazon Prime.
DirecTV's satellite, right? But do they have a network offering as well?
DirecTV now.
Okay. So, yeah, so there's lots of choices. Now, the question, I think, is, are they better choices than what you were getting with cable? Are they less expensive? And, in some cases, I think that may be true. But I literally cut the cord entirely, and I'm just getting over the air. Anything I want to watch online is through my iPad, for example, through YouTube. And you can sign up for, I think it's called YouTube Red or YouTube Premium.
TV, yeah.
And there's so many channels you can get. And last year they had Red Sox games.
Yeah, so I actually had a conversation with somebody about this today. They asked me on my opinion, and they had approached Comcast about a cable package. They looked at cable, or I'm sorry, they wanted to separate out the cable package from the internet. And I believe, don't quote me, but I believe the internet was gonna be $75, but for a bundled cable package, it was gonna be $100. And honestly, I think, if I'm not mistaken, YouTube TV is now up to $50 a month. So really, if you're lucky to get in on like a 2-year deal with Comcast, it's still probably cheaper to go with cable than it is for one of those internet delivered packages like that. Now, if you can cut the cord and depend on Netflix, which is, I don't know, what, $19 a month, or
Amazon Prime.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
There are other options, and then just using over the air. But,
Yeah.
But if you want to keep an eye on your local town council to make sure they don't raise your taxes, you might not want to cut that cord all that fast.
Invite
Those
competition.
politicians need supervision.
Yeah.
I've been following the development of Smpte 2022-7 and then 2110 now, of which I think the Cisco product you referenced is in that family of
Got
sort
it.
of SDI is dead, copper SDI is dead as we know it, which was a banner at NAB like, what, 5 years ago?
Yep.
And I
Still not
sort of
dead.
think the rumors of its death may be a little exaggerated, but I mean, basically it's the convergence you were talking about of traditional broadcast protocols and standards with IT broadcast protocols and standards. And it seemed to me that what took 30 seconds to plug an SDI cable from product A to product B now might take an advanced IT professional maybe half a day to accomplish the same thing. And eventually we'll get there, and technology is always progressing, but
Yeah, and the connector falls out easy too.
I've yet to see the real promise of that deliver over the cost and complexity. I was curious. what-
Yeah, I just read an article just this week actually about IP, that it's been the promise, right? IP trucks, IP technology, and it just hasn't come, right? And so, I mean, it's there, and I think it can be done, but at what cost? Because the speed in which we can react to some of those, even still, I would call somewhat manual tools, is probably quicker. And the expense behind the staff to support it is real, I can tell you.
It seems great in concept, but are you just going to end up converting it back to SDI at the beginning or the end anyway? I was curious about that.
I would throw out two, I worked for a camera company and a router company, now I work for a test and measurement company. There was talk that if you were in the router world, 256 and larger, you really needed to consider IP. But that got kind of diminished when people started thinking about 4K and higher bandwidth, because now it takes 4 levels of a router to get there, and that's much more expensive. So that number is coming down, but to your point, it's much more complex. In the old days, you plugged in a BNC, you never took down a router.
Right.
You maybe had an incompatible signal, but you didn't take down the whole plant. Now, if you plug something in that's incorrectly configured, so you almost need a little sandbox to configure a device before you put it on the network, you could take down the entire network. So that part of it has changed dramatically, but I don't think manufacturers are going to continue to manufacture the big old iron routers, for example. They are going to go, as you said, to the Cisco router methodology, but by the same token, people are saying baseband over copper is dead, and I would point out that we're in one of the most technologically advanced broadcast facilities in Boston, and we still use analog microphones. So, digital is not going just to IP. There'll still be plenty of baseband around for years.
In reality, we live in a hybrid world.
Yeah.
We just bought a new router, which is actually IP
And it will be a hybrid world for many years to come.
Yeah, I say the same with the cloud, right? We've got local storage and we have cloud storage,
Yeah.
and they're different, but they're different intentionally, and we use them differently intentionally.
That's true.
Yeah, yeah. And, in corporate America, you see the same thing. There's a lot of the, Fortune 100 companies have a hybrid approach to the cloud, right? It's too expensive to put all their telephony in the cloud, so that's all on premise. But storage and everything else is in the cloud. So you're going to see that for some time to come. I saw a few hands, yeah.
I just had a couple of comments I wanted to make. One, I think it's going back to you, Bob. You were talking about, or somebody mentioned VMware.
Virtual machines.
Yeah. It's interesting is that a number of the applications we're using today are actually utilizing the GPU much more than they are the CPU.
Oh, yeah.
And so we are actually going full bore on building towers again with full, $5,000 GPUs stuffed in there. And I'm even buying CPUs that are half the cores that I anticipated on buying.
Sounds like you're mining Bitcoin.
Well, I think it's interesting to say that, we've been chasing CPU speeds and cores and so forth for years. And now the manufacturers are, we're talking, Lumen app files, After Effects,
they're all GPU. They don't rely on CPU hardly at all.
Not only that, but from a programming point of view, there are all of these people who've made, software development kits out from FFmpeg, and that goes in very naturally with these GPU engines. I think this is a fundamental change. This is a change sort of like when editing went from, AB roll machines to capturing and then editing on a drive. The one thing that I kind of agree with the other person who sort of said something a little bit, which is that, computerization is making things more complicated and fragile and unreliable. I agree with him that that has happened, and it really shouldn't have been the case. But unfortunately, it's just so easy to complicate things, and to add a feature here and to add a feature there, that it's very easy to take something that is basically simple and make it just complicated enough that people can't really wrap their head around it, and that it's easy for them to push a button and have the thing go wrong. And yeah, it's been my experience too, and the users, they just want to edit a video, and now they have to sit there and negotiate which machine are they really on? Are they on the local machine, or are they on the virtual machine? And it's...
I had one more comment too, and this is addressing John. I was fascinated to hear about the lenses that you talked about, buying the old lenses to get chromatic aberrations or vignetting on the edges, or zones 1 on the, or soft or something like that. It's very confusing. I don't know, people remember 3, 4, 5 years ago, Douglas Trumbull was here at GBH.
Yeah.
It was maybe on a weekend or Saturday or something. And he was talking about 48 frames per second and wants to have, don't look as dead.
Yeah, he's the gentleman from Western Mass, right?
Yeah. I think it's just confusing because we've sort of come full circle where he was striving for images to be perfect, to be lifelike, no film look, go as high a frame rate as possible. And here you are talking about lens companies detuning the images, making them look bad, because it seems like you get something that's out there long enough and it's a fad, and then it dies and they do something 180 degrees opposite.
Yeah. But I think it all depends what you're trying to do too, right? You probably want news to look more real. You want sports to look as real with higher frame rates and all of that. But then if you're trying to do something artful, then yeah, you want your chromatic aberrations, you want the lens flares and the soft edges. So, I think that it's the tool for what you're trying to accomplish. And I think they've realized they need to have different tools for different end results too.
I just find it amazing that they're doing it intentionally on the glass as opposed to using a software filter. Because we all use software filters, to play with and enhance our photos and so forth, and to not have that same approach there is mind-boggling.
And actually, to Tim's point, when Peter Jackson, he did the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it's amazing and beautiful, and then when he did The Hobbit, he did it in this super high frame rate. It might have been like 120. He shot the whole thing in 120 frames, and it was super real, and it was incredibly disconcerting to the audience. They hated it, and so it's when used appropriately, it's great. But the audience really wants a little bit of distance from the subject matter in terms of narrative film.
And The Hobbit in wide release was actually modified to get rid of that.
Yeah. Took it a step back.
All right, folks, we're on the final stretch here. We're going to transition to my favorite part of the meeting, which is our pick hits, and hopefully the panel hasn't revealed any of their pick hits thus far, and let's learn what they really saw out there, what they really enjoyed seeing, and why don't we start with you, John, in terms of your pick hits?
So a couple things. One was, this is not new. I think this came out earlier or later in 2018, but Adobe After Effects, the content-aware feature, content-aware fill, is just an incredible thing where you can really take any moving object in the frame and outline it, and instantaneously and trivially, Adobe After Effects will remove that object from the frame, and you cannot tell the difference. Just one more step in us never being able to believe what we see on the screen anymore. The Sony CLED wall, 2 years in a row, it's my pick hit because you've just never seen anything quite like this thing. There was also in Sony, there was a thing called the Sony REA C1000 AI appliance. And basically it was just a little box that hooks up to your PTZ cameras, and it can imbue them with new capabilities like facial tracking and handwriting recognition, and actually doing a pretty credible job on blue screen without the blue screen. Being able to view a professor walking around a classroom and to be able to drop out the background and put something else behind it. And it actually, I was impressed with how well it did that. AI driven, of course. This is dumb, but a motorized monopod. A monopod that had some of the motorized slider technology built into it. So you could use it standing up, and you could get the camera to do a slow controlled boom up, or you could do it horizontally and get tracking with this, and it looks like a carbon fiber monopod. It was kind of cool.
If they had a gyroscopic monopod that could stand on its own.
Well, they had that little 4K camera on the end of it.
Yeah, that's my
good.
pick, the Memo.
The Memo. And that's called the Moza Slipod for slider / monopod.
Wow.
And then this, I got to mention, this is my pick hit, even though I didn't actually see it. So there is a cinematographer from Canada who was roaming the halls, and I kept hearing stories about this guy. So I'm looking for him everywhere, and like I'm searching for Yeti, and I'm not finding him. But a lot of the bloggers found him later, and so he's a cinematographer, and he felt like. It was always a pain in the ass to change lenses. If you're doing a documentary series and you want to change lenses really quick to accommodate whatever action is happening, or if you're in a crappy environment, you don't want particles to get into the imager. So he had invented a turret system, 3 prime lenses on a turret on a Sony FS7, But the cool thing was, I mean, he's just a independent inventor, but he had nailed this incredibly difficult problem, which is to have 3 different lenses, not just mechanically turning on this turret, but also sending appropriate information electronically to the camera. So it could have been a Nikon lens or a Canon lens or whatever it was able to talk to the camera through interpolation software, whatever it was. And for just some guy in his basement to be able to put this thing together, it was just stunning.
You did, huh?
Yeah,
Did you? And then the only other thing that I thought was really cool was just again, nerdy. It's a variable ND filter that was based on a rotating polarizer and an ND and a static polarizer, and you could dial the exposure any way you want and tie it into your iris. So if you had a scene where you can see Phil and the background very clearly, and you wanted to change that so that all of a sudden the background behind Phil goes blurry, you could adjust your aperture to get the background blurry, and the ND would automatically compensate for the amount of light that was now coming in.
So it would maintain exposure.
And so you would never see that the exposure was changing, and I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah.
I thought one was really interesting. If you imagine a world of 3.0 when we start to personally deliver content to multiple people, how do you monetize that? There's a company thinking about sales in a different way, and actually you mentioned it, using Bitcoin as the means in which you bring back financial gain from the experience. And I thought that was interesting. They're thinking outside the box. There's a company called Guyan Solutions. It's again a 3.0 company where they're talking about personally delivering streams and a lot of analytic tools that are associated with that, which, you know, if you think about the world we live in broadcasting today, Nielsen kind of has us all in a situation where we broadcast something and then 30 days later we get some sort of report back as to how it did. They're looking at ways to, you know, up to the second, inform broadcasters as to how things are doing when people are turning the volume up, down, channels sideways. It's just a pretty fascinating tool. And then also bringing other things like emergency alerting and educational tools, interactive television, stuff like that into the forefront. And then automotive television. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Automotive television?
Yeah, there's a big push. I think Avis is actually doing a POC in the Boston market using 3.0 they're calling it the living room experience. And with autonomous vehicles, they want, you know, the riders to have entertainment. And so they claim, they think that broadcasting is going to have a big impact on autonomous vehicles and that we're going to be the ones to, it could be partially what saves broadcasting, actually. So we'll spend a lot of time on our cars, and, you know, and podcasting has taken off like crazy.
Yeah.
And so they're actually thinking that the cars are going to be the next thing for broadcasting images and video to those units. So I
Very
thought that was
interesting.
cool.
Wow.
One of the things I found that was, it was sort of just one of those nerdy things, and I loved most of the things John said too, so he stole my thunder. But a company called The Light Source that does a lot of mounting hardware for fixtures announced something they called the Mega Batten, and it was essentially the lighting grid pole with integrated power and DMX. So it, first of all, cleaned up an install immensely, but the thing that was really great about the integrated DMX is that you weren't breaking the chain of DMX. So normally you're stringing all your lights together, you pull a fixture down, you forget to butt them together, and you lost half your grid. The way that it was wired, if you had a vacant port, it didn't matter. And so that was a really cool thing.
That would be like the Christmas tree equivalent. Right?
Exactly,
Lights
yeah.
where-
Both Shure and Sony were showing off the wire of their lavs, and they were showing off how silent they were. Sony was, Steve showed us their new wireless kit, and you know, you'd expect so much noise from rubbing the cable, and you didn't hear a thing. In Shure's booth, they actually had the cable wrapped around a motor with a weight on it, and it was swinging it and dropping it, and it was just great, because you think of all the times you hear that noise. And then, again, Sharp blew me away with their 8K stuff, but the thing that got me the most was their 8K museum display. And it was a touchscreen designed for art galleries, and, you know, they had some Renaissance masterpiece on it, and we're pinch and zooming in to, you know, from here to a small box, and there was no loss. It was phenomenal.
Awesome. Jerry?
Couple of things. I mentioned a couple of things before, but again, you're looking at a couple of different companies that seem to be breaking the silos again between OTT and broadcast. And the FinComs group, actually, I'll go back to actually something that Stacy said at the beginning about going to IBC. IBC for me was always a place where I wanted to go. I go to IBC because I wanted to look out in the future for a couple of years, because most of the people in that group were really doing that. And then NEB always feels to me like IBC is a couple of years ahead. Well, there are some of the companies that I used to run into only at IBC that I'm starting to run into in NEB, and they're doing some different things. The FinComs group was one, and there's a company called Switch Media TV and Tulix.com, which has been around for a while. There are a bunch of other little ones too. The Connected Media and IP Pavilion area was where I spent a good amount of time. And I just think, just looking at there again about trying to figure out how the old barriers between all the media are really going to be breaking away, and that we're going to be looking at them all the same. The other one that I haven't mentioned and nobody's mentioned yet is esports. The esports pavilion that they had there this year, which is the first time I think they've done it at NEB, was kind of interesting, but the more interesting thing was actually going over to the Luxor and going into the esports pavilion at the Luxor Hotel.
So explain the esports pavilion.
It's basically, it's almost like, it's a combination of fantasy league sports and real-time events, real-time computing events with a large auditorium of people in it. There are people who make a lot of money doing this kind of thing, and they may be playing anywhere from shooter games to sports games and to other kinds of things. Both of my kids who are in their late 20s are both into this, so
So
Dad
it's
had to
another
go
way to
and try
lose
to
your
figure
money.
out his way. It's another way to lose your money.
They have a draft.
But
Really? Yeah, they draft kids to
Yeah,
play these
yeah,
games. They have
yeah.
Olympics and all kinds.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But, you know, I mean, and for me, I mean, I guess to connect to the meeting is that it's an NAB experience. But I found it interesting that it's gotten to the point now where NAB has actually included esports as part of that. The vendors who were in there, the Switch, I think, was one of the main vendors in that area. But there were bunches of other companies who were all building the gear to support the growth of esports endeavors. There are large auditoriums being built all around the country for this kind of thing. It's a very major deal. And I'm looking at it really with two things. One is that I want to sort of be relevant to my kids, I guess, if I can. But the other part of it is just, you know, just looking and saying, okay, there's another shift here, and this is an audience who, for as traditional broadcasters, maybe we're not reaching. What's going on?
Yeah.
I don't know if I have an answer for you, but that was one of my takeaways from the show.
But it
was kind
sounds
of
like a
interesting.
natural fit for like a DraftKings or a FanDuel.
Yeah, it is, and all the sports betting companies. I mean, and you know, watch the legalizing of sports betting and all this kind of thing. All of this is going to really keep on taking off. But there's a lot of production in these enterprises. There's a lot of production that goes on. They are big auditoriums and big video support. And it's not only everything else that's going on online. But it's just, I thought it was interesting that it sort of showed up on the radar of NAB this year.
Yeah.
And then what else? I had one other thing I wanted to mention. Audio watermarking in ATSC 1.0. Some of the companies that are involved in doing audio watermarking for 3.0 have been working with existing broadcasters to use the watermarking technology to deliver targeted advertising, and they've started doing some of that. And the thing I thought was interesting about that is that it's sort of looking at the idea of how technologies in 3.0. The idea about, what am I trying to get at? That 1.0 technology is still going to be around for a while, and try to find a way to make it sort of walk and talk like 3.0. I'm not really sure about, I only saw a little bit about this and had a couple of conversations with people. I'm not really sure where this is going or how it may be taking off, but I just think it's going to be interesting because I think it's a connection sort of that has to be made. How do we get from 1.0 to 3.0? There's got to be some give and take in this back and forth.
Very good. Thank you. So Bob, if you had been at NAB,
What would you?
what would your,
I would have bought a Republic of Gamers gaming laptop because I just bought one anyway.
okay.
I think these are the new Macintoshes of this industry, and I think I'll be buying more.
So you're back in the PC camp. Yeah.
I never really left, but
All right, so just real quick, predictions. I know, so AI seems to be the thing this year. And, you know, we didn't talk about voice as an element of AI. Was there any voice-activated technologies there? And then, you know, like Alexa helping to do something in the broadcast space or the production space?
Just remote control. I
Yeah.
can see some of that.
Yeah.
Talk to your remote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but nothing
Yeah, it's
stands
funny,
out.
it was not, I mean, at least in my experience in the show, I didn't really see a whole lot of presence of it, but not that it isn't there.
Right.
It's.
Yeah. Okay, so predictions, Mr. Rule.
I'm gonna wrap up all of these themes and say that next year we will see 8K cameras with AI introducing chromatic aberration and
In the cloud.
and
And it's in the cloud.
yeah.
And delivered to the home
Yeah.
through 5G.
That was my prediction. Thanks a lot. You got nothing?
No, I do actually. I think the thing that, if I'm looking into the future, we're seeing more and more cyber attacks. And our plant is obviously more and more IP, and we have to get better and better at the tools and the the skill set to fend that stuff off. I don't know if you saw Weather Channel was just recently hacked. And so, the last thing a CTO wants to do is get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning that your plant has just been taken over or malwared by somebody. So I think if we don't see it, I think we should see better education and better tools that, that help us protect these systems and our infrastructure.
Excellent. Tim?
I mean, I think that I'm not sure what the great next leap we're going to see next year is. I think it's going to be, we saw 4 manufacturers with 8K, so probably the people that didn't release it are going to this coming year, and I think they're going to be working on ways to make it more manageable. And, the development of AI and software as a service, that's just going to keep growing. So I don't know what the brand new revelation is going to be, but I think growth in the things where we saw it this year is going to continue.
Very good. Jerry?
The maturity of all of this to get it beyond buzzwords and try to get it to real product and real product that's what I think I'm really interested in seeing. There are lots of claims that different kinds of software products can deliver AI services to a given workflow, but getting there is kind of hard still. And although it's a lot, even of a period of a year, it's a lot different. But also it's a question again about seeing scale and prices coming down and moving. That's going to be happening again. There'll be a few pieces of that will be considerably different by next year, I think.
Bob?
My prediction is I'm going to go to the show next year.
We got through the whole show here, and I don't think we talked about drones once. So
I don't think they were there.
We just
no drones there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here tonight. Thank you, WGBH, for hosting. This was an excellent venue here. There's some leftovers over here. If folks want to take some leftovers with them, you're welcome to do that. And we'll see you next year. Thank you.
That's all right. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for all of the years of service.
Certainly.
Fantastic. Our next meeting is at Rule Boston Camera on May 22nd. It's a Wednesday night, and we're going to have Hugo Gagioni, the Chief Technical Officer of Sony, doing a presentation on images. Everything from the images in this phone all the way up to digital cinema. So that's Wednesday, May 22nd at Rule Boston Camera, which is now in Newton. Thank you for coming.
Marty, I want you to take a group.
Yes, let's do that. Yep, let's do that. Yep.
Yeah.